And then that way for the people who have really good presentations, we can use those as templates for the other students to use as a guide. Okay. And I don't mind you working on your presentation while others are doing the presentation, because you're probably going to get some ideas on how to do it, right? So you're just constantly improving the presentation until you go out there. Okay. And don't forget in your presentation, you've got to have a nice cover page. The second page should be basically the major takeaways from the chapter. Give you an outline, go through the outline, and then the very last slide is going to be the major takeaway again. Okay, so you're basically selling us the key core concepts, from the chapter to basically us to take away, some of the knowledge that you've learned. Yes. I know. That's why you're supposed to be working on it right now. That's why you work on it now. So go through the presentation and put it into the format that I just talked about. Okay? Because do you think maybe you could do that in about 10 minutes? Are we doing it now? So put together a professional cover page with the title, the university and the course underneath it, to, me, from, you, and a date. And the second page is the abstract, it's the major takeaways. And give me the outline, they give me the presentation, and give me the major takeaways again at the end. Have you guys ever done a presentation before?
Yes, and we already have it,
That's fine.
figured out. So.
Okay, but you're going to do a PowerPoint, right? Yeah, so you can be working on the PowerPoint to put it in the format.
Oh, again? And then
Yeah.
print it out?
No, you don't have to print it out again. You can still go from that, but I'm just saying, when you give me the presentation, when you submit it to me, it's got to be in that format, so that everybody is working in the same format, okay? And this format is the way you do it in the business world. Okay, I don't know what you guys do in academia, but this is the way we do it in the business world, okay? So we don't adhere to academic standards, we adhere to business standards, because we're not going to go work in academia, we're going to go work in the business world.
Man, they make it difficult on me. Just combine them, like you do. Combine them.
Well, that's what I'm doing.
Like you do.
That's what I'm doing.
It makes it hard for us, though, the rest of the world, we're in academia.
Yeah, I know, but that's their problem, not our problem.
Yeah, I agree with your way of teaching.
That's why we're in academia.
It's messed up when we have both going on,
Yeah, well, that's not the way I teach.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's not much value to that unless you're going to become a PhD. We need to go out and make some money.
Yeah, I guess I'm printed out.
Okay. So can you guys raise your hands? Who's going tonight? Okay, perfect. You guys are working on your presentations. What I'll do is you work on your presentations. I'll lecture for maybe about 40 minutes, 30 minutes. You can work on your presentations, get them in order, save them down, and then after the presentations are done, you'll go back maybe tomorrow or the next day, you'll clean them up, and then you'll send me the presentations and I'll post them to the website. Okay, and then I'll make them available to everybody. Okay? And if you do a really good job, what I'll do is when I take a look at your presentations, I'll give you some critical feedback. You'll fix them, okay? And then I'll post them. And then what you can do is you can print out the presentations. I would probably bind them once they're approved, and then those could be used as a writing sample for prospective employers. Okay? So all the content that you're producing should be at a business quality level so that you can show somebody the type of work. So what I did on the website, so here's the course log. So this is going to be the way, this is the course log right here. So there's going to be a chronology of all of the lectures there. Then I'll probably do a PowerPoint folder. So there's all the PowerPoints available. And here is the syllabus, obviously. Then what else am I doing? Oh, I can go in there in course materials. Okay, so there's the course materials, there's the syllabus. Okay. Here's the in-class quiz. Okay, I already gave you the quiz. We're going to go over the quiz. You're going to take really good notes on the quiz when I go over the content, and you're going to study the material, and you're going to come in and I'm going to test you on it. Okay? Now, you took my real estate practice course, and so did John, and you had another student in here. You were here too, so you took the practice course. So you guys are the tutors for the class. So if anybody has any questions about the content after I go over it, those guys will be able to help you out too. So not only me, but also them. Okay? I don't believe in surprises on these exams. I like to give you the exams up front, then we work through the material, then you study the material that you should be learning, and then you come in and you test your comprehension. And then if you do great, you move on. If you don't do great, you got to go back and redo it, okay? Until it's perfect. And you learn the material. And then here, the introduction to commercial real estate. What I did is I gave you, this is the PowerPoint, this is the one I'm going to do tonight, and I'll work through this one. The introduction to commercial real estate will also answer some of the questions on the exam. I'll let you know which ones those are. And also, I have the primer right here. Okay. Does everybody have a copy of this? Does everybody have a copy? The Introduction to Commercial Real Estate Investment that I gave to the California Association of Realtors in 2010, or it might sound like a long time ago, but the content within this presentation is totally relevant. This primer, you need to read this primer, okay? You need to read it and understand it, because it basically is an encapsulation and a synthesis of everything you need to know, pretty much, for commercial real estate investment. So I spent a lot of time putting together this primer to be able to present to high level. Were you in the class last week? Okay, well you need to get up to speed. So we have a bunch of stuff. Here, do you have the syllabus? Do you have? Oh, perfect. And then you got the pre-test and you got the exam and stuff. Okay. Okay. There's some up there. You have to be engaged, you have to be interactive, you have to take responsibility for your education. I can't babysit, okay? You guys have to be engaged, you have to want it, okay? So what this is class notes. You want to read this thing, okay? Okay, so I can't, it's okay for you to talk, but you need to whisper because you're distracting me. I appreciate that. But whisper, and then try to stay engaged. Okay? Because I talk really fast and I go over a lot of stuff, and if you miss what I talk about, you're not going to know what I'm talking about. Then you're going to get frustrated. Okay? And that's why I videotape too. So let's go through the class notes here. Okay? So this was written for top residential agents that want to get into commercial real estate. Okay? This evaluation course is not a residential valuation course. This is a commercial real estate valuation course. Okay? I'm here to train you for careers in commercial real estate, not residential sales, but commercial real estate. Okay? This is the 10 to 20 million, size transactions, 100 million, $250 million, $1 billion, $2 billion, $4 billion, $8 billion. $16 billion. Okay, we can get to those kind of numbers pretty quickly in this space. Okay, it's just like the tech space. These companies are selling for multi-billion dollars. These unicorns and these technology companies. It's the same in real estate. The asset class is huge. Okay, so quickly, this is a brief overview of the investment in commercial real estate. The instructor me will go through key areas for professional development. For example, topics covered in this session include educational and training requirements, commercial broker and client relationships, land use economics, market and investment analysis. Other topics of discussion will be how to build a commercial property portfolio, market and asset selection, and financial analysis, valuation techniques and tax advantages and disadvantages, and exchange opportunities. The 1031 exchange is the tax law. The IRS tax code 1031 basically states that if you buy a piece of commercial real estate and you lease it out and rent it out as an income-producing property, you can depreciate the cost basis of the property over the 29 to 30 years, and basically take those depreciation allowances and lower your taxable income. Yes, okay? So that what that's going to do is that's going to lower your cost basis, but it's going to create a capture tax that currently is around 25% of the net proceeds on the sale of the property. The property is going to, and the land value, if you buy it in a good location, is also going to appreciate. So the tax on the capital gains is 20%. So what's 25 plus 20? 45%. So if you sell the property, after a period of time, you're looking at a 45% tax rate. You add in another 10% transfer tax, that's 55%. You add in another 5% Obama, the Medicare tax, that could be 5 to another 10%, you're looking at 65% of your net proceeds going to taxes. So if you do a 1031 exchange, you got 180 days to close the transaction, you got 90 days to identify 3 replacement properties. If you can find the upleg and you can find the replacement property, and be able to do the 1031 exchange, you don't pay any capital gains and you don't pay any transfer taxes. Or you pay the transfer but no capital gains and no recapture. Okay? That's how people make money in real estate, is they exchange. They keep deferring their taxes, and by the time they're 85 years old, they're sitting on maybe 3 $10 million properties, and they're worth $30 million. Then they roll those properties into an irrevocable trust. They die, and then all the properties go to their heirs at a stepped-up basis, and they pay no taxes. No taxes. Okay, this is how the rich guys get rich. Yes,
So as long as you reinvest in 180 days, you don't pay.
you got to close in 180 days, and you need to identify.
But if you want to keep your money, then it's like you're working for yourself.
You're going to roll over the money, and you're going to defer your taxes. And then at the end of the period, at some point in time, and I can talk more about how to exit real estate more efficiently to get around some of the tax burdens that you may be facing at some point in time. But this is just a tax deferral that allows you to roll over the equity to be able to buy bigger properties and accumulate extremely efficiently. And the ideal situation is you should put the properties into an irrevocable trust and die. Okay? Then the money after the sale of the property, the properties get a stepped-up basis. All the cash that's basically made from the sale goes to your heirs tax-free.
What if I want cash?
We don't care about you. We care about your
Generations.
no, but we can put it into a charitable remainder trust and basically pull out the basis of the property once you transferred it into the trust. So you can pull out all that money, but the asset's going to have to go to the charity. So there are schemes and ways, and I will go over an exit from real estate later on, kind of in an advanced course once you guys have kind of gotten used to some of these key terminologies. But I would read this, okay? All right, so then real estate basically requires constant education. You gotta learn the construction stuff. You gotta learn the land use. You gotta learn the law. You gotta learn the brokerage. You gotta learn the finance piece of it. There's so many things. It's a cross-sectional discipline that cuts across everything from geology to basically sociology to politics to law to finance to economics. You need to know a little bit about all that stuff. So it's a constant learning process. Okay, and everybody who gets into real estate designates themselves and commits themselves to a lifelong learning process. So that's the first thing. Then the academic programs. We actually have an undergraduate program here. So does San Jose State, so does San Francisco State, so does UC Berkeley. Okay? And there's other schools that have undergraduate and graduate programs in real estate, either designated as real estate programs under a Master of Science degree, Master's in Real Estate Development, or it's a component of the MBA program. Okay? And the top schools are UCLA, USC, UC Berkeley, MIT, Columbia, NYU, Georgetown also has one. University of Fullerton has got a program. University of San Diego, San Diego State, UC San Diego, they all have programs, but real estate is in the finance program under the business school. Real estate, I'll be totally honest with you, the real estate asset class and real estate is the bastard child of finance. It's totally unique, it's dirty, it's the language is completely different than corporate finance. And usually people used to look down at the real estate people because they weren't corporate finance and finance people. The corporate finance and real estate have converged over the last 15, 20 years, and now we get just as much respect from both sides because we deserve it. All right, and then city colleges are a major institution of learning for real estate. Most of the licensing and other property management and trust management and those things are done at the city colleges. Okay, so that's another place to go. And now there's all kinds of online offerings for real estate training, okay, which is great. The top organizations in real estate, I would say the top organizations based on prestige are the Counselors of Real Estate and the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. The Counselors of Real Estate and the Chartered Surveyors are basically valuation experts, counselors, consultants, strategists, project managers, divisional heads. These are the top people with at least 10 years of experience. Most of them have graduate degrees, law degrees, engineering degrees. So they have high educational attainment, and then they usually work with their clients on very sophisticated problems, and they basically solve the problem. If they can't solve the problem themselves, they basically outsource the execution of the solution. They usually figure out what the problem is, figure out the solution, and then give it to the client to either execute it or they will oversee the execution.
That's their business?
That's what we do. That's what we do. And then the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors is the oldest valuation organization in the world. It was basically invented by the Crown of England because they own so much land and buildings and agriculture and throughout the Commonwealth all over the world. So they basically needed a valuation expertise. So they basically created the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors to be able to train these professionals to go value the land, value the crops, value the buildings, and then be able to assess the taxes on behalf of the Crown to then expropriate the taxes from the people who are leasing the land and the buildings and running the agriculture. Yeah, it is. I'm a member of that too. And then the Appraisal Institute basically will certify you as a MAI, which is the certification to become a certified appraiser, commercial appraiser, and you need your license from the state of California, from the California State Appraiser's Office. So with your license from the state and your MAI designation, you're probably one of the top valuation experts working on very complex valuation work. And a lot of people who do that are also counselors and also Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors because they do a lot of valuation work. Could be mortgage pools, could be securities, could be portfolios of real estate, could be individual real estate assets, could be land that nobody knows what to do with, and they will come in and basically figure out what the highest and best use to put on that piece of property for whoever the sponsor is, either a government agency, corporation, or an individual that owns the land. Okay, so we usually work on a consulting basis. The Certified Commercial Investment Member, or CCIM designation, which I also have that too. That takes about 3 years, and that designation is usually pursued by the high-level and extremely successful investment brokers, okay, or very successful residential brokers that want to break into the commercial real estate brokerage or investment sales side. So it's another certification that says you know your stuff. Okay. The Institute of Real Estate Management, if you want to get into property management or asset management or portfolio management, that certification, which is the Certified Property Manager, is another designation that basically says that I've been trained and certified in property management, in asset management, in portfolio management. And the other organization next to that is BOMA, the Building Owners Management Association. They also have a certification. And a lot of people that I know, the very successful people in asset management, have the IRM certification, the BOMA, certification, they have their broker's license, and the top people will then go do the executive program at UC Berkeley. They'll do an MBA with a concentration in real estate in the executive program, which takes 3 years and costs $150,000. And you need 7 years experience. After you do that program, you're pretty much on your way to becoming a portfolio manager or a chief operating officer or CEO of a company.
$150,000 is pretty cheap considering how much money you
Exactly. No, totally. Exactly. So it's not really how much the program costs, it's getting in
Right.
and knowing what you need to do to do it. You're right. It's not that much. And then if you negotiate the deal correctly, you can get your employer to pay for most of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Or you run it through your corporation. You do it that way too. The Urban Land Institute, extremely prestigious organization. Everybody who belongs to Urban Land Institute is involved and is a stakeholder in development, real estate development. So it could be mortgage people, could be engineers, could be construction, could be developers, could be investment brokers, could be lawyers, accountants. So it's everything around the built-up space, around development. And they also have really good education programs. They have a 2-day real estate finance and investments workshop that you can do online or in person. And they also have an Excel pro forma course, which is the stuff you're working on in this class. So if you take their 2-day finance and investments and you do the 2-day modeling class in Excel, you pretty much have all the skill sets that you need to go get a really good job. And that's really quick. And that'll cost you maybe $1,600 to do the two.
What would you be modeling?
Exactly the same stuff we're doing in this class.
Okay.
So cash flow modeling, lease renewal probability.
Do you take that in undergrad though, right?
Yeah, but this is through the Urban Land Institute.
Okay.
Okay, and it's a crash course as opposed to the whole semester.
You get a certificate.
And you can get a certification through ULI too, through the courses. It's just another avenue. And they do have also a young leaders group. So if you're under a certain age or a student, they'll give you a preferential membership. Once you get that membership, you are tapped right into their frickin' network. You go to their networking events, you go to their programs, you start meeting a bunch of people, and you'll be employed really quickly. Okay? Because the real estate community is really small, and everybody knows each other. And if you get referred within the network, you're pretty much guaranteed either a job or at least an interview or an information.
Like Uber.
What?
5 stars.
5 stars.
Uber driver.
Exactly. And then some of the top programs, the University of Southern California's Lusk Center and the Fisher Center. Those are the two, along with MIT and Columbia and NYU, have real estate research institutions that basically do all kinds of research that brings together academia and real world problems that they can solve. Okay? So USC is like one of the best programs I've seen. You can do an MBA with a concentration in finance and development, finance and real estate, or you can go do a master's degree in real estate development. Or go do a 2-week, there's what's called the Ross program down there through the Lusk Center. It's a 2-week boot camp in urban infill development around impoverished areas down in the LA Basin. It was launched after the Rodney King riots, where basically Koreatown and Watts were basically being burned up, and there wasn't enough people down there to basically rebuild the community, so they needed to train people very quickly, so they launched the 2-week program to basically get the skill sets with the people that were working in the community to rebuild the community. So it's pretty, and you can get scholarships for that too, which is pretty badass. Certified public accountant, there's a huge area in real estate accounting, fund accounting, around securities, and working for publicly traded and private firms in their accounting departments. So if you want to be a CPA or an accountant, real estate is a great place to move into. Same thing for the law degrees. If you want to get a law degree, you can go into property transactions, you can go into land use, you can go into broker defense, you can go into all kinds of areas around the tax law, you can go into all kinds of areas, okay, with the law degree. On the security side, you can get your Chartered Financial Analyst certification, which is a finance certification, you can go become a real estate investment trust or REIT securities analyst, you can become a portfolio manager, you can go into the commercial mortgage-backed security side, which is the debt side, as an analyst or a portfolio manager. You can go onto the mortgage and mortgage-backed security side. So that designation is really a crossover between the finance and then the security side of the business. If you want to, like me, if you want to sell basically real estate investment trust securities, you want to sell commercial mortgage-backed security mutual funds or exchange-traded funds, you want to sell Delaware statutory trusts or tenants and tenant in common, those are all registered product through the SEC, and you have to have a Series 7 through a broker-dealer or a registered investment advisor to sell those real estate-backed security products. Okay. Gee, Professor, I didn't know about all that stuff. That's why I'm here. Okay, so the next on page 2 is really the deal structure. If you become a broker, I'm a commercial broker, I work in a residential brokerage office. The residential brokers want to do commercial deals, but they know nothing about commercial. So basically they go out and somebody says, hey, you sold my house, will you sell my building? Sure, I'll sell your building, because they see dollar signs. The problem is they've been now talking to the client, and they've been saying something to the client, and they know nothing about commercial real estate, they never transacted a commercial real estate deal, so they try to do it themselves, and they totally screw up the transaction. Then they come to me and they say, Larry, you know, I got a client that has a commercial building, that wants to sell the commercial building. I go, great. I go, let's get together. Have you talked to them? Yeah, I've been talking to them for 3 months. But I figured out that I couldn't do the transaction because it was outside my expertise. I'm not going to take the transaction because I don't know what they said. They could have lied to the client to get the listing, right? So they could have not disclosed some of the aspects of the transaction and around the real estate. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking on liability. So unless I have some kind of contract that indemnifies me from whatever types of non-disclosures or disclosures that they have, I won't take the transaction.
Is it your friend?
This has happened multiple times for me. Okay, so it's really, really important. But usually what you can do is if you're a residential agent, usually there's a 5% split. Okay, so there's 5% commission in some cases on the total amount of the transaction. Okay, so we're going to get 5%. You know, on the $1 million, which is $50,000, we'll split it, and we'll both get 25 grand. Okay, that's kind of how it'll work. Or I can negotiate whatever the split's going to be. Okay, so you can negotiate that. So for these residential agents, they can work with the in-house brokers, or they can find an outside broker to affiliate and then run their transactions through them, and they get some kind of negotiated split, you know, on the commission that's done from the transaction.
Sorry to take us off topic,
That's okay.
but I have a question about that UC Berkeley graduate school.
Yeah.
That's called an MRED.
Now, the UC Berkeley is the MBA. It's the Executive MBA program through UC Berkeley, through the Haas program. So you work for 7 years and then you apply to Haas. And you basically do an Executive MBA program. It will take you 3 years, and you can concentrate in real estate. You can go Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You can pretty much engineer whatever you want, but it costs around 150 grand.
Thank you.
And it's easier to get into that program than the regular MBA program, because the Ivy Leagues are really hard to get into. But if you walk in with a really good GMAT score, and maybe you've remediated some of your GPAs on the core courses, aced the GMAT, and you got a really good track record over the 7 years, you'll get into the program. Okay, go ahead.
Can I get one of those also?
You guys can just come up and question. Okay, so that's that. The next one is the real estate economics and the market analysis. Okay, so what drives real estate values? Okay, what drives demand for real estate? Well, industrial production, gross domestic product, jobs. Jobs are the number one factor. So if I want to calculate the amount of square footage that's going to be absorbed, which is absorption, is the terminology for demand. Okay, so one job, you know, it used to be one office job would equal 200 square feet of gross absorption. So what I could do is I could look at the amount of job growth, and I could multiply that by 200, I'd look at office jobs that were created times 200 square feet, I could basically take that projection of that absorption of that demand and subtract that from the available space and be able to calculate the vacancy rate, which was the amount of vacant space divided by what is called the base inventory. The base inventory, which is basically the market. So the availability divided by the base inventory will give me the vacancy rate or the availability rate. In commercial real estate, if the availability rate, the vacancy rate is below 10%, rents are going to grow at a rate above the inflation rate. And if the vacancy rates are above 10%, then the growth rate in the rents are going to be below the inflation rate. Okay? So those are kind of the metrics, and you probably want to write that down here on your paper.
And so is the
Yes.
availability divided by-
Yeah, it's the availability amount of available space or vacant space divided by the base inventory. The base inventory. So that if the base inventory is 10 million square feet and the available space is 1 million square feet, then the vacancy rate is what? 10%. Got it. It's 10%. And if the vacancy rate falls below 10%, the rents are going to grow above the local inflation rate. So here in the Bay Area, the long-run average rental growth rates at the 10% vacancy rate is 5%. So at 10% vacancy rate, rents grow at 5%. Okay? If the availability or the vacancy rate drops below 10%, then the rents are going to grow above 5%. If the availability rate is higher than 10%, then the rents are going to grow below the 5%. So it's a metric. Okay? It's a structural metric that we use in commercial real estate valuation and market research to basically have in our head. That we can project out what the absorption rate's going to be and what the vacancy rate's going to be in the future, and it looks like the vacancy rate is going to fall below 10%, then I can project that rents are going to grow above 5% for the next 3 years. That's what they hire me to do, okay, is to be able to forecast what the market's going to do and what rents are going to do. And if rents are going up, values are going up. And if values go up to the point where they're higher, if values are higher than the cost of construction, at some point in time, if the values of real estate are significantly higher than the cost of construction, then the developers and the contractors and the construction people are going to come in and they're going to start building. Because that's the arbitrage profit, right? Cost of construction, the price I can sell it at, the difference is my profit margin. Okay? All right, so that's just some of the metrics. Population growth, household formations are also demand factors for real estate, particularly residential, which is considered single family, but also apartment buildings or apartment communities. Okay? So what you're going to have at the top, you have new construction, you have available space, you have net absorption, you can calculate the vacancy rate, and 1 minus the vacancy rate, you need to write this down. 1 minus the vacancy rate is the occupancy rate. 1 minus the vacancy rate is the occupancy rate. 1 minus the vacancy rate is the occupancy rate. 1 minus the occupancy rate is the vacancy rate. And what you're going to find out is when you read these reports, they're going to report vacancy rates and occupancy rates. Okay? So if the vacancy rate, the structural vacancy rate is 10%, then the structural occupancy rate is 90%. And if the occupancy rate goes above 90%, then rents are going to grow above the local inflation rate. If the occupancy rates fall below the 90%, then the rents are going to grow less than the local inflation rate. So you got to get really good at are you talking vacancies or occupancies. Okay? And the terminology is switched depending on who you talk to. Okay? It's just like in any other language, there's multiple terms for the same thing. Right? One's more precise than the other depending on the context of the conversations. Okay? And then from the occupancy and the vacancy rates, you can calculate the asking rents, which are the rents in which is basically the bid rates. Right? The landlord is going to say, okay, We're gonna list 50,000 square feet of office space in downtown San Francisco, and the asking rent is gonna be $75 a square foot, annualized. Okay, down in LA, they quote in quarterly. In San Francisco, they quote the rents in annual rents. Okay, annual rents. So it's different areas of different cultures. But in San Francisco, you want to go lease out some office space in a really nice building in downtown San Francisco, it's going to cost you at least $75 to $100 a square foot. Okay? And the landlord will probably pay for some of the expenses, and they'll probably then pass through some of those expenses to you. Usually when you quote asking rents, it's called full service rents. Okay? Where the landlord picks up the garbage and the utilities and maybe taxes and maintenance. Okay? And I'll get into this a little bit later. We'll hit on this again. Then from the occupancy rates, you get asking rent and effective rents. Effective rents take out the vacancy factors. And then after you get your effective rents, you subtract out your expenses and you get net operating income. And then what I'm going to show you is you take the net operating income, you divide it by what is called the capitalization rate, or a cap rate, or what is also called a discount rate, and you can get the value of the property. Okay? So that's the first valuation methodology that we're going to look at. Okay? So that cap rate, the net operating income. So I'm going to figure out the net operating income for the property. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide it by what is called a capitalization rate, or a cap rate. And that's going to give me the value of the property. Okay? Now the cap rate, embedded in the cap rate is the risk-free rate, which is usually the 10-year treasury yield. Then you're going to start adding on some risk premiums. How about the property called? So test question. Is the risk premium going to be big for a Class A high quality building that was built last year? Or is the risk premium going to be high for a building that was built in 1940 in East Oakland?
Risk premium would be high for the old building.
That's right. So older buildings in inferior locations are going to have a higher property quality risk premium, where newer buildings in better locations are going to have smaller risk premiums. Okay. And then you're going to have risk premiums not only on property quality but for location. Then you're going to have a risk premium for the tenant credit quality. The tenant credit quality. So those high-rise buildings that were built last year in downtown San Francisco, Salesforce Tower, not only the best tenants with the best credit occupy those buildings. Buildings that are built in the 1940s, in other parts of the Bay Area, those tenants' credit aren't as good. Okay? So the tenant credit risk premium component is also embedded, tacked on to the cap rate. Okay? So credit. Does real estate have a long economic life?
Yes.
Yeah. So how long do you think that Salesforce Tower is going to sit there? Probably 200 years. Probably 200 years. How long do you think that a building, basically a single-story, stand-up, tilt-up building, built in 1940 in Hayward, okay, how long do you think that's going to last? Maybe 50 years. So we have 200 years and we have 50 years. Okay. So real estate is a long-term asset. So there's some kind of maturity risk premium that needs to be taken into. Real estate is also subjected to tax legislation. So there's a tax risk premium too. Can I buy real estate in other countries?
Yes.
Yeah. So So you're gonna have to tack on a country risk premium. When you go to China and you buy a property in China, do you own the property outright as a fee simple estate? Do you own the land in China when you buy real estate? No. Okay. And has companies and individuals that have bought properties in China have their property taken away from them? Absolutely. Turkey, Africa, South America, other countries that may not have rules of law based on Western civilization, Western European legal and political systems, you can have your property misappropriated. And then what about currency exchange rates? If I buy a property in another country, is there a currency exchange rate? If you bought property in Venezuela,
Yes.
right, and the inflation rate was 1,000,000%, right, and you were getting rent off the property, what is the value of the peso today? Nothing. So the value of your rent is zero. Maybe the value of the land has gone up because of inflation, but the income that you're generating from the building is worthless because of the devaluation of the currency. It's happening right now in Turkey too. So all of these risk premiums have been factored into the discount rate. And these risk premiums are, they widen and narrow. Yes.
Isn't Turkey getting a lot better though?
What?
Turkey, aren't they getting better? Like,
Yeah, no, I forgot what the currency was, it's devalued, like almost 70%, and the interest rates in Turkey now around 60% because there's massive capital flying out of the country. So people are selling off real estate assets to convert into the US dollar to basically preserve their store of wealth. What's the value? The real estate value is probably plummeting over there as people start to liquidate the securities and liquidate the real estate assets in those countries.
So the sanctions that Trump is placing on Turkey,
Yeah, that could have a major impact too on the valuations of the real estate.
Turkey was the only country that actually beat they took out all the federal debt. And that's when everything
Yeah, so when you go, I'm not going to talk much about international, but this is basically how you calculate a capitalization rate, but you start with the 10-year treasury yield. And as we learned about last week, the Federal Reserve starts to sell off bonds, drive down bond prices and drive up interest rates, it's going to drive up the cap rate, it's going to drive down property values. And if we start to go into a recession or a financial crisis, the Federal Reserve is going to step in, start to print money, buy a bunch of bonds, drive up bond prices, drive down interest rates, and prop up the value of commercial real estate and residential. So that's what they usually do, is they will print a ton of money, they will buy a bunch of government bonds, and will drive up bond prices and drive down interest rates to prop up these values. Because the mortgages on the residential properties and the mortgages on the commercial properties are collateralized by the underlying real estate values. And if underlying real estate values are falling, then the person who owns the property, at some point in time, the loan to value is going to go too high, and they're probably going to default on the loan. And then the loan's they're going to have to foreclose on the property. So they're defaulting on the loan, so now the bank's not getting any cash flow, and now they have to take back a piece of property where the value is actually going down, and the banks will go insolvent. And then there'll be a run on the bank like there was in Greece and Spain during the financial crisis in Iceland. So the Federal Reserve is basically there as a backstop to basically prop up the system and to keep real estate prices inflated and up at a certain level to basically protect the banking system and to keep capitalism basically working. The economy goes in, or the real estate cycle tracks the overall business cycle. So it goes through recovery, growth, peak, decline, and trough or recession. And I'll go into that a little bit later. The commercial real estate investment analysis, there's market analysis, and there's investment market analysis. There's a capital market and a space market. Okay, and I'll get into that too. So again, in the space market, you get jobs, you get demand. Space is going to get 'Kay? Then the vacancy is going to be whittled away. Vacancy loss factor is also what it's called. It's gonna go down. The rents are gonna start to grow. The concessions, what we do to try to lease the space in our building, we will give away free rent or some other type of concession to get tenants to sign the lease in our building. Those will start to go away too. And then after you take out, you get to the effective rents, and I'll write this out, you take out the expenses, you get to the net operating income, you divide the net operating income by the cap rate, you get the value of the property. So you use the income statement, okay, to get to the net operating income. And then divide that by the cap rate, okay. And the cap rate can also, I'll do in a second. The cap rate can also be calculated by the net operating income divided by the sales price, or the value of the property. So if I know the net operating income of 3 properties that have just transacted, and I know the sales prices, I can calculate the market cap rate that's occurred in the marketplace. I can take the market cap rate from the 3 properties that just sold, just like my property, and divide it into the net operating income of my property and get the value for my property using the income capitalization approach. This is the sales comparable approach. This is the income capitalization approach. Okay? So I can use them interchangeably to be able to come up with an initial value back of the envelope for that, for my building. And I can get paid for that. As a broker, I can do a broker opinion of value. Client comes to me, says I'm thinking about selling my building. What I'll do is I'll put together a broker opinion of value. I'll put together like a mini appraisal report. I'll submit it to you. I'll show you how much you can get for the building and for the service. Maybe you'll give me the listing contract and I'll sell the property on your behalf. And I'll charge you only 2.5 points on the sales price of the building. And I'll split the 2.5 points with the other brokers, so they'll get 1.25. I'll take 1.25 on the $10 million that we sell, which is still a lot of money, right? Yes.
So in other finance classes, we see formulas like this, but we're never really taught how to assign a value to these risk premiums. Will you go over that?
A little bit. Usually, this is more theoretical, okay? This is more theoretical. You would have to build some type of multiple regression model to be able to isolate these risk premiums and then to be able to run the regression to get the coefficients and to be able to figure that out. Usually, we can back into a lot of these risk premiums. Let's say that the cap rate, right, the cap rate on the building, looking at a building in an apartment building in Tucson, Arizona, it was built in the 70s. It's like a 20-unit building. It's fairly old, it's not in a great location, but I can get like an 8% income return. This equals 8%. So basically, if I buy it, I'm going to get an 8% income return on the property. So it's the net operating income divided by the value is going to give me the income return, okay, the income capitalization. Well, we know what is the 10-year treasury right now? Can you look it up? Where's the 10-year treasury yielding right now? Because we got to come up with the risk-free rate, right? So if we subtract out the risk-free rate from the cap rate, we know what the risk-free rate is. So where's the 10-year treasury yielding? 2.8, so roughly 3%. Okay? You take out the 3%, which is the risk-free rate. So these risk premiums are roughly 5%. Of the 5%, I would say the majority of the risk premium is going to be in the property quality. Maybe that's 200 basis points. So that leaves you 300 basis points and 3 percentage points. The other one is going to be tenant credit. The credit of the tenants that are going to be in there, probably 2%. And then the location of the building is probably 1%. So basically, the majority of the risk premiums are embedded in the quality of the actual building. what type of tenants are gonna be occupying the building, and then the property location. These other factors would be macro factors. Okay. That are probably embedded or distributed in here somewhere. But you can kind of back into the risk premiums. And then what you'll do is you'll, as you start to work in the real estate space, you know, specializing by property sector, office, industrial, retail, apartments, hotels, within a certain geographic location, Silicon Valley, you'll be able to impute these risk premiums on top of the 10-year treasury. Okay. You can probably even go to the academic literature and find out, and some of these probably already know this, but we just do it in our head.
So is a lot of this just come from experience?
Yes. Yep, you got it. Okay. All right, and then you have investment market fundamental analysis, where you're looking at the mortgage market. Real estate is such a huge asset class, it takes so much capital. I mean, you don't have $2 million to go buy a $2 million building. What you're gonna wanna do is put up $250,000 and basically get the 1.75 million from the bank, right? So basically you're able to buy and control a $2 million building for $250,000 down, right? That's called leverage, okay? So your ability to get a mortgage at a certain interest rate with certain terms is not easy to get. You have to have a relationship with the bank to be able to do that. And basically the banking industry and its ability to lend is really determined by the overall capital market conditions and the overall condition of the overall economy. Okay. And if you go into a recession, banks are not going to want to lend to you, okay? Or a financial crisis, they ain't going to lend to you. Okay? But when things get really good and there's a lot of money and there's a ton of money in the banking system, they kind of loosen up their underwriting standards and they're a little bit more free in the distribution of that credit to borrowers of lower quality credit. Okay? All right. Then the space and investment market technical analysis. I already talked a little bit about that. Capital market expectations. Again, that's really interest rate determination. When you build portfolios for clients, I'm asked to build, will you design a portfolio strategy for me? I want to invest in commercial real estate. I don't know what property sectors to invest in. I don't know what locations to invest in. I don't know what property types or quality to invest in. Will you do the research and design for me a portfolio strategy? Okay, but I don't want to take a lot of risk. I'm fairly conservative. I'm looking for an 8 to 10% rate of return, and I'm looking for low volatility and low risk. So I want a high risk adjusted rate of return, but my return expectations, my return requirements are 8 to 10% return. Go figure it out. Okay, so that type of investor is a risk-averse investor. Okay, the investor that waits for the crash to occur and prices to bottom out, that's a contrarian investor. They're willing to go in and buy in the worst times ever because they have money and they know that the market's going to turn around. The risk-neutral investor is just looking for high return. They don't care. I'm looking for the highest return. I'm willing to take as much risk as possible. And the same thing with the risky investor. They love risk. They're risk junkies. They'll go into the worst market, buy the worst property with the worst tenants, and they'll kick out the tenants, they'll redo the building, they'll re-tenant the building, and then they'll sell the building, flip it. Okay. Then there's sector styles. I just want a portfolio of all office buildings, or industrial buildings, or retail buildings, or apartment communities, or hotels. So I can build a diversified real estate portfolio across the different property sectors, or what I can do is just buy one property sector type in multiple locations to get the diversification. Or I could just say, screw it. I want office buildings, medical office in Santa Clara County, Cupertino, Mountain View, and Sunnyvale. So I'm going to take huge exposure and huge risk to the tech sector. Okay. Then there's property types. Class A buildings, which were built after 1980. They're usually high-rise or mid-rise buildings in central business districts, and they've been redeveloped and remodeled and rehabilitated over time. So they're higher quality buildings. Older buildings in more inferior locations with physical deterioration and functional obsolescence. Okay? So a Class B building and a Class C building will not be like a Class A building that was just built with state-of-the-art glass, state-of-the-art steel, state-of-the-art heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, state-of-the-art telecommunications, state-of-the-art electrical wiring systems. Those are going to be Class A buildings with the highest quality construction standards.
Like the Salesforce?
Like Salesforce. It's a perfect example of really an A-plus building. Okay? But a B building, like the Shell building or the 333 Bush building in San Francisco, was built in 1961. Okay? It's built in 1961. It has physical deterioration because these buildings sit in the elements and they get bombarded by acid rain and heat and sun and wind and rain and stress and earthquakes and those things. So over the years, the actual physical structure of the building deteriorates. So it has physical deterioration. The older buildings also have functional obsolescence. You need to write this stuff down because this is the terminology that we're going to be using the rest of the semester. Functional obsolescence here's a perfect example of functional obsolescence. If you look at Salesforce Tower, it's probably a pretty good building. State-of-the-art, brand new, it's oblong. Okay? Then you go look at 555 Cal. It's basically one big box. So both buildings are about 80 stories high. Right? They're both literally Class A buildings, but the 555 has basically a Class A location, but it was built in 1968. If you go look at the floor plans, in 555 Cal, which is the base of the B of A building, there's going to be more load-bearing structures within the building because the steel, the concrete, and the materials that were used to build the building are not state-of-the-art. Okay? The stuff that's being built now is all state-of-the-art material science. So in Salesforce Tower, there's probably only 4 major load-bearing structures to keep the building and probably a middle central structure to basically stabilize the building. Compared to this one that has multiple load-bearing beams and structures, this one is extremely efficient and extremely light. So the floor plans here are more efficient. There's more leasable space here per floor compared to this one. And if I had to choose, this is what's actually happened in San Francisco, in a lot of these large Class A buildings that were built after 1980, people are saying, I'm out. I'm not going to 345 California or 555 Cal or any of these other buildings. I'm going into Salesforce Tower because the load factors are less. It's more efficient. I get more space. It's state-of-the-art. It's a newer building. But if I went in here, I have less leasable space. I have less rentable space. The floor plans here, because the technologies are more open, technology floor plans. So I actually have more open space here than I have here. So if I was a broker and I was trying to lease a floor at Salesforce Tower, and I was trying to lease a floor at 555 California, the B of A building, I would probably want to lease over here because the functional obsolescence of the floor plans over here are extremely high. And because there's less leasable space, the load factors here are really high, and the load factors over here are really low. So the space over here is extremely efficient. And I can pack more people in than I can over here. So floor plan configurations, what are called load factors in the building. Floor plan configurations are representative of the functional obsolescence of the building. Salesforce has no functional obsolescence whatsoever. The B of A building has a lot of functional obsolescence because it was built in 1968 as opposed to 2018. Okay?
So
So when we talk about assessing buildings and the risk in these buildings, we're gonna look at the physical deterioration, we're gonna look at the functional obsolescence of the building, and we're gonna look at physical materials, we're gonna look at the location in which it's in, we're gonna look at the tenants, we're gonna look at the roof, we're gonna look at the siding, we're gonna look at the foundation, we're gonna look at all that stuff to be able to assess the integrity of the building, which will then flow through to the value of the building. So theoretically, the older the buildings, the lower the value. The newer the buildings, the higher the value, because there's less physical deterioration and less functional obsolescence. Yes, sir?
So are you saying functional obsolescence?
Yeah, functional obsolescence.
Obsolescence is the integrity, the physical integrity?
It's basically the physical configuration. Okay, since this one has more load-bearing beams to stabilize the building because it was built in 1968, there's less rentable space and it's a very inefficient building because most of the mechanical in the building was built, and the physical building was built in 1968, not using sustainability and cutting-edge technologies that have been developed over the last 50 years.
So are you saying that most newer buildings are being more,
Less functional obsolescence.
less functional?
Less functional obsolescence. Newer buildings, if they're built state-of-the-art or architecturally built to be extremely efficient from an energy standpoint and from a functional standpoint, they have very low functional obsolescence. Older buildings, their functional utility is obsolete because it was built in 1968. There was different requirements then. Now the tech firms all want state-of-the-art buildings with high-speed telecommunications, extremely efficient, sustainability, renewable energy, solar, water reclamation, they want all that stuff embedded in the physical plan. So they're extremely efficient.
No, I think it's Salesforce. I
Yeah.
work for here.
Yeah.
It's nice in there.
So physical deterioration and functional obsolescence is almost nil for Salesforce Tower. For the B of A building, 555, you have very high functional obsolescence and physical deterioration, although it's a very valuable building because of the land. Okay, all right. So in geographic styles, I can concentrate by trade area, neighborhood. Neighborhoods are aggregated into submarkets. Cities and counties are aggregated into metro areas. And then those metro areas are aggregated into regions. And then you have the U.S. as a whole. So the question is, how far down are you going in your analysis to be able to pick the property that you want to buy, and how far down are you going to go to then be able to pick buildings within different geographic locations to get either concentration or diversification. Okay? Concentration or diversification. All right? And then investment styles. Okay? If I am an investor, a pension fund advisor, a large private equity firm, or a large publicly traded real estate company, I'm usually going to buy what are called core properties. Core properties. Core properties are like the Salesforce Tower. Very large, high-rise, mid-rise office buildings in San Francisco, Boston, Seattle, LA, the core markets. These properties have been up and running for a long time, so they're stabilized. And me as the investor want to buy these core properties in these core locations because they kick off predictable, durable cash flows, not only historically, but in the future. Okay. So that's one style. The other style is opportunistic. I see a property, it has some functional obsolescence and some physical deterioration. It's a Class B building, maybe a Class C building. I can go in and I can put in my management team, all of my accounting, the technology, I'll redo the landscaping, I'll redo the lobby, I'll redo the exterior, I'll redo the roofing, I'll put in some technology, and I will reposition or remodel the property and bring it up to a higher standard so I can get higher rent. Okay? And then the value add person, the value add strategy is I'm gonna go find the crappiest building in the best location. I'm not gonna tear it down, I'm gonna redevelop it. I'm gonna redevelop it. And completely reposition it, and probably create a brand new looking building out of a really old crappy building. Okay? And make a lot of money on
Would
it.
that be the best way to go, rather than?
Well, there's most of the people that I know do value add, or they do opportunistic. And then it's mostly the institutional investors or the high net worth family offices that are looking just stable cash flow to do a core strategy. Okay? Property and portfolio management. When you're managing your properties, you're going to be putting together a budget every year. Okay? And you're going to be projecting out the income statement over a 5 to 10 year period. So you're going to do a budget, accounting. You're going to do an income statement, project that out to get the valuation. That's accounting also. So again, you need an income statement. You're going to have to do the balance sheet. If you're going to be doing the opportunistic and the value add approach, you're going to have a construction and an engineering team that basically is putting together the construction estimates associated with the construction costs associated with repositioning the property or redeveloping it. So you're going to have to put a construction budget together. You're going to have to use standards to come up, the income, the expenses, the construction costs. You're going to know what those costs per square foot is going to be for the different metrics when you're doing the assessment. Okay? And then you're going to do it every year. And then you're going to do variance analysis and other types of approaches. The expenses, when you're looking at expenses, I'm looking at this building, I'm looking at the expenses, I'm looking at this building, here's our building, we run it really efficiently so I know what the expense ratios are for each of the line items. I'm looking at this other building over here, I calculated the expense ratios, I can see within the line items that they don't know what they're doing on the leasing side, I can see that they need to do rewiring in it because the utility costs are really high, there's leakages in the plumbing, so I know I need to go in and redo the plumbing. But if I take basically my model and move it over into this building, I could probably increase the net operating income significantly and generate huge amounts of value in that property. So I do a common size income statement and a common size balance sheet analysis to be able to identify those inefficiencies. Leasing strategies. If I think the recession is going to hit between 2021 and 2023, am I going to be writing 3-year leases? No. And if I think that we're going to come out of it in 2025, am I going to be writing 5 to 7 year or maybe 10-year leases? Exactly. So if you know what the cycle looks like going forward, either from a demand or a supply side, you can basically write the leases to skip over those recessions, depressions, or periods in which there's too much supply, and basically time diversify your cash flows within the building using leasing strategies. Okay? Marketing and tenant selection. Your marketing team. Basically, once you know exactly what kind of product you have, and after you've repositioned the property, then your leasing team will come up with a leasing strategy to basically do outreach, to find those tenants, the best tenant, to basically sign leases within your building with the best credit over the lease term that will best suit the strategy that you're doing based on your projections. Okay? So they're going to target certain tenants with a certain credit to put into the building. When you look at a building, you look at Salesforce Tower. Do you think Salesforce Tower has a lot of tech companies in there? Yeah. And in 1998, 1999, and 2000, basically the majority of tenants and the majority of landlords were writing $75 and $100 per square foot leases with tech companies with no revenue, no income, and really bad credit. And what happened to those companies? They went bust. And what happened to the vacancy rate in those buildings? They went up significantly. And when there wasn't enough rental income to pay off the mortgage, on the building? What happened to the borrower, the owner of the building that can't pay off the mortgage? Then they defaulted on the loan and the bank foreclosed and took the property. That's what happened in 2001, 2003. Okay, so you gotta look at the diversification of the tenants that are in your building based on industry. So I wanna have some transportation companies, I want consumer product companies, I want legal companies, I want some accounting, I want some tech, and I don't wanna be over-concentrated in any one industry because industries go through different cycles, and if I'm over-concentrated in one industry sector, I could be looking at a huge economic vacancy, which could jeopardize my viability in the building. Okay? And we as real estate managers are fiduciaries for our clients. We're really smart. We do all of this research. We disclose the research. We give opinions based on what we know because we're looking out for the client and we're looking out for the client's interest. That's our fiduciary responsibility at the end of the day. So we will make recommendations to lower the concentration within the building if they're over-concentrated in any one sector by a certain amount of types of tenants.
Is it okay, like legally, to say, if a tech company wants to rent here in your building, and you have too many, say no, because I don't want tech companies?
You would probably, well, most landlords, to be honest, are greedy. So they'll take the money if they're willing to pay $150 a square foot. They'll probably sign the lease because they'll try to capture as much rent as possible. And if they're really smart, what they'll do is they'll take some of the monopoly profits from the excessive rents and put it into a sinking fund or a reserve account, so that when some of these tenants do go BK and they're losing out on the money, they still have a reserve to be able to pay off the mortgage, and at least give them some time to be able to find other tenants to replace the tenant. So yeah, and then some more conservative landlords will say, I only want to have 30% of my building in tech, and then they'll cap it.
But is it okay to deny?
Absolutely. But usually most of these landlords have other buildings. So they'll say, maybe I can't put you in my building here, but I have another building across the street or down in another sub-market that would fit your needs. Why don't you go down, we'll put you in that building. And then maybe later on, if one of the tenants vacate, we'll let you know and we'll bring you into this building. So we kind of move around as a strategy.
I think in answer to this question, subject to the discrimination laws also. It depends on the reason.
I can discriminate against tech companies.
Yeah.
I can't discriminate against anybody
For
based
example,
on,
if it's a black tech company, he might not, he might just use it as a tech company, but.
that's usually how the landlords do it. If they were one of those landlords, most institutional investors cannot do something like that because it's liable. And if the firm ever found out about it, they would go to the Justice Department and sue the landlord. And the landlord's PR and the brand of the company and the reputation of the company would be permanently tarnished. So they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do it. Okay. All right. The other is benchmarking. Okay, I'm going to benchmark the performance of my building based on other buildings that we compete against in the marketplace. So I'm constantly doing rent surveys to see how much rent my competition is getting, so that if I do get a tenant, I can lease out that space at market rent. Okay. I'm also benchmarking my occupancy rate or my vacancy rate in my building to the market occupancy rate and the market vacancy rate. I'm also looking at the concessions that the market are giving compared to the concessions that I'm giving. So it's such a competitive market that if you have a really good property management team or asset management team or portfolio management team or a market research team or an acquisition and a development team, you're constantly surveying and analyzing the market to make sure that you're maximizing the value of the building, okay, at the end of the day. There are valuation techniques, okay? There's basically 4 approaches. The first approach is the cost approach. How much would it cost for me to replace this building, okay? How much would it cost for me to replace this building? So, perfect example, I own a building. What would happen if the building, was demolished because of an earthquake or a fire? how much would it cost me to replace that property based on the construction costs per square foot? So the way we do it is we will go in, I'll look at a building, let's say it's a 250,000 square foot office building. I will basically look at how much it would cost for me to replace that building. What is the total construction cost to replace that building if I had to? And let's say to build the building based on cost is going to cost me $50 million. Okay, it's going to cost me $50 million to replace the building, to rebuild that building. $50 million. But if I can buy the building for $25 million, it's 50% of the construction cost. It's 50% of cost. So when I build a building at $50 million, or when I buy a building at $25 million, I would buy the building at $25 million because I can buy it below its replacement cost. So one of the approaches to value is the replacement cost. Okay? And it's the cost per square foot. So if I know the total cost per square foot that it would cost to build a building like mine, I can take the overall cost per square foot, multiply it by the square footage of my building, and get a cost basis for my building. What it would cost, the cost basis, the cost approach for the building. That's one approach. Okay. The other approach, I'll talk about the land residual approach in a minute. The next approach is the sales comparable approach. Okay? Sales comparable approach, I got my building. Okay? I know when it was built, how big it is, the type of tenants, the quality, the location, everything. I just found 3 other buildings that sold recently, just like my building. What I can do is I can take the sales price for the 3 buildings, divided by their square footage, and get a sales price per square foot. And what I'll find out is that the sales prices per square foot are all relatively close to each other. So what I can do, maybe I just average the 3 prices per square foot, I take my square footage of my building, multiply it by the price per square foot, and now get the value of my building using the sales comparable approach. It's a second valuation technique. Okay. It's a little bit more complex than that, but I'm just giving you overall methodology right now. Okay. Then the third approach is the income approach. And there's 2 approaches in the income approach. The first approach is the income capitalization approach. So if I know the net operating income of my building, and I know the cap rates for the 3 buildings that just sold, I can take an average of the cap rates for the 3 buildings that sold, divide it into my net operating income, and get the value of my building using the income capitalization approach. So I'm using both the sales comparable approach and the income capitalization approach together to get the value. And then the last approach, and I'll get into this a little bit later, the last approach to value is the discounted cash flow approach. Okay? So I'm going to take my income statement that I projected out, I'm going to take my gross rental income, I'm going to take out my vacancy rate, my vacancy loss factors, I'm going to get, and my concessions, I'm going to get my gross effective rental income, I'm going to take out my expenses, and I'm going to get net operating income. I'm going to grow that net operating income out per year over the 5-year holding period. I'm going to grow that net operating income, come out 1 more year, divided by the cap rate to get the value of the building, add it to the last year's cash flow, and then I'm going to divide those cash flows by a discount factor to get the present value of the building. So it's the discounted cash flow. And I'll go through this with you over and over again in the class until you totally get it. So the second approach to the income approach is the discounted cash flow methodology. From all of those approaches, You're gonna reconcile them, and you're gonna come up with an overall value of the building. If you're an appraiser, it's called an appraisal. If you're an acquisitions associate or an acquisitions officer, you're coming up with the intrinsic value of the property. And if I can buy the property for less than the intrinsic value, we're gonna buy it. If I come up with values that are less than the price of the building, I'm either gonna reject it or I'm gonna ask for a price reduction to get down to the value of the building that we came up with. Okay? So that goes through the approaches, the present value, the discounted cash flows, and the discount rates that you're using to discount the cash flows are the expected returns that you anticipate for that investment. Most institutional investors require an 8 to 10% rate of return. Riskier investors, opportunistic investors, value-add investors are looking from 16 to 22%. Really opportunistic and really value-add investors that are risky investors, they love risk, they're looking from 22 to 42% internal rate of return on their investments. And those become the discount rates that you use to do the discounted cash flows to come up with the intrinsic values using the DCF. Okay? Then you're going to apply growth rates to the rental incomes. You're going to apply growth rates to the expenses to get your net operating income. So if your net present value, if I come up with an intrinsic value and I subtract out the price, I'm going to get what is called the net present value. So it's the valuation minus the acquisition price and gives me the net present value. Actually, it's all right here, following along right here. Okay? I'm going through this. This is everything you need to know about this class. Okay? So if you're following along, this is your primer. And we're just going to go over everything in this primer over and over again in more detail. So this is basically the high level stuff. So if I get a net present value that's positive, am I going to accept or reject the project? I'm going to accept the investment. Got it. If my net present value is negative, do I accept or reject? I reject it. Or I ask for a price reduction. You need to write this down. When I get a negative net present value, I can either reject it or ask for a price reduction in the amount of the negative net present value. Okay? You need to know that. You need to learn that in your brain. Okay? If the net present value is 0, your intrinsic value equals construction costs or equals the acquisition price, you're going to accept the project. Okay? So again, present value greater than the price, you're going to buy it. Present value less than the price, you're not going to buy it, or you're going to get price reduction. The present value equals the sales price, you're going to buy it. Internal rate of return. Okay? In your calculators and in your spreadsheets, there's going to be an internal rate of return calculation. Okay? That's going to calculate the rate of return, the internal rate of return on the investment on an annual basis. Okay? And we need, in these investments, we need our internal rate of return to equal our expected return. Minimum. Our internal rate of return needs to equal our expected return. Okay? So if I run the internal rate of return on your cash flow projections, and I get an internal rate of return that's higher than the acquisition price, am I going to buy the property if my return is higher than my expected return? Absolutely. Absolutely. My return, my return, my internal rate of return, my return on the cash flows are higher than my discount rate, than my expected return. Yes, I'm going to buy it. Okay? And I'm going to go through all of that in detail. Okay? If my internal rate of return that I calculate is equal to the acquisition price, do I accept it?
Yeah.
Yes. Because I'm getting my internal rate of return. I'm getting my expected return when the internal rate of return equals the discount rate for the expected return. So that's a yes. And if my internal rate of return is less than my expected return, do I accept or reject the project? I reject it. Or I ask for a price reduction. And if I can get the price down, my internal rate of return is going to come up and match my expected return. Okay? And I'll go through all of that. We went through that in the other class too. Mr. Jim, question?
Sometimes your NPV say accept the IRR, say.
Yeah, so I'll go through that, but when your net present value is positive, you accept it. When the net present value is 0, you accept it. When the net present value is negative, you reject it, or ask for a price reduction in the amount of the negative net present value. Okay? When the present value is equal to the price, you accept it. When the present value is higher than the price, you accept it. When the present value is less than the price, you reject it, or ask for a price reduction. When the internal rate of return is higher than your expected return, you accept it. When the internal rate of return is equal to your expected return, you accept it. When the internal rate of return is less than your expected return, you either reject it or you ask for a price reduction in the amount of the negative net present value, which will bring the internal rate of return up to the expected return, and then you accept it. Okay? So that's the methodology. Cash on cash returns. So I got net operating income. I'm going to subtract out the mortgage payment, and I'm going to get the distribution of cash flow to the equity investor, or what is called cash on cash. So cash on cash is basically the equity distribution. So I calculate the net operating income, I take out the mortgage payment, I get cash on cash. I take that cash on cash, I divide it by the amount of money, the down payment that I put into the property, and that's going to give me my return on equity. Where in real estate, it's called the cash on cash return. So net operating income minus the mortgage payment, cash on cash, divided by the equity that you put in, is going to give you the cash on cash return, which is also called in corporate finance the return on equity. Corporate finance people, return on equity. Real estate people, cash on cash return. Okay. Different terminologies depending on the world in which you live. But the real estate people now have converged into the finance people have converged into real estate, and now we're bilingual. We can talk both sides. Okay. And then the leverage. Okay, you're going to apply mortgage to your property to lever up your returns. So if I can put up $100,000 on $1 million property or a $10 million property, as opposed to $250,000, and get the majority of the money from the bank, I'm levering up the property. I'm levering up my equity. I'm using somebody else's money to buy that property. I'm putting in a little money, and I'm getting a lot of money out. That's called leverage. Okay? So real estate is a capital-intensive asset class. You have to use borrowed money. You have to use mortgage finance. That's the leverage, okay, that you're using from the bank if you can get the loan. So you have to have really good credit. You have to have a track record in the building, or the collateral in which the loan is being collateralized on has to be of a certain quality so the bank feels comfortable giving you the money. Yes, sir.
This might be a dumb question, but would that be the case for if you're gonna sell the property as well and rent? Like if you're going into it to...
Well, I'm gonna buy this building, put up the least amount of money as I can. Obviously, the tenants that are in the building and the leases that are in place and the rental income stream, the bank is going to look at and say, okay, this rental income stream plus the value of the building, I feel comfortable lending you the mortgage, to finance the building because you have enough income to cover the mortgage payments. Okay, that's called the debt coverage ratio. So net operating income divided by the mortgage payment, I have enough money coming off the property to cover the mortgage payment.
They're for sure gonna at least
And the other thing they look at is the loan to value. So the loan amount to the value of the building. They used to be able to lend 70% of the value of the building to you, okay, in the old days. And after the financial crisis, they would only lend you 50% of the value of the building, so you had to come up with 50%. Before, you only had to come up with 30%, because the loan to value was 70%. So you had to come up with 30. Then they dropped it, because the financial crisis was so horrible. So they said, no, we'll give you the loan, but we want a loan to value of 50%. You put up 50%, we'll give you the financing for the other half. Okay.
Still is there?
It's still pretty restricted. The standards have been loosening up over the last 6 to 9 months, the last 12 months. But again, they're going to look at you as the borrower, your track record, your credit, your collateral, your history, your credit scores, if you own any other properties that they can cross-collateralize the loan on, and then they'll look at the building, they'll look at the quality, they'll look at the obsolescence, the deterioration, the location, the tenants. They'll look at all that stuff to underwrite the loan, and if they feel comfortable, they'll give you the loan. Okay. All right.
Is that just for buildings or houses too?
Houses too.
It's 50/50 on buildings?
That's not necessarily true. In residential mortgages, you could probably put down as little as 10% with private mortgage insurance, or with FHA or some other type of government-backed loan. So if you have government backing, okay, or you meet certain requirements, or you buy mortgage insurance, then your down payment would be less, would be 10%. But they'll look at your credit score, they'll look at the building, they'll look at the neighborhood, they'll look at the quality of the house before they feel comfortable lending on it, particularly if it's a jumbo loan. And jumbo loans are loans above 200, and actually like 500,000. And in the Bay Area, most times are like $1 million. So they're pretty much all jumbo loan market, okay, which has different underwriting standards. All right, we'll take a little break after this. So the next is you're going to tax policy, okay, in the United States with income tax policy and even corporate tax policy. But tax policy is a major component of real estate transactions. Okay? And the government basically says if you buy a commercial property, we will allow you to depreciate the property's cost basis over a 29 to 32 year period. 29 years for apartment buildings, 32 years for office buildings and commercial buildings. So basically you just take the value of the building and the price of the building, divide it by 30 years, and that's your depreciation allocation that you're going to be able to deduct against your taxable income every single year to lower the taxable income to lower your tax liability. Okay? But over time, as you depreciate the property, you're lowering the cost basis, and the difference between what you bought it for and the cost basis after you've taken the depreciation, that's called recapture, okay? And that recapture tax is 25%, and you're gonna have to pay that. And if the building goes up in value, you're gonna have to pay capital gains tax, and that's 20%. So if you sell the building, you're gonna have to pay right off that 45%, and another 5% for Obama and Medicare, that's 50%, and transfer tax. That's 60%. So 60% of your net proceeds are going to be eaten like that. Unless you bought the property in Sunnyvale, Cupertino, Mountain View, because the value of the property went up 1,000%, I don't care about 60%. I'm going to cash in, and I'm going to pocket the money and go into something else, because I'm already making millions of dollars.
So Professor, you clean your depreciation annually?
Yeah, you're going to take an annual depreciation allowance. Or you can probably amortize that over a monthly period. Go ahead.
Does that also apply to residential that you're renting?
No, yes. If you bought a property as income producing property and it happens to be a single family home, but it's income producing and not your primary residence, you can depreciate the building because it's income producing.
What if you bought it as a primary and then 5 years later you start?
You gotta basically live in it within with 2 of the last 5 years, and you gotta rent it out for 3. So there's certain guidelines or metrics that you need to meet to to be able to get the depreciation component. And if you do it right, you get to double dip, okay? Because if you own a primary residence and you're married, you get to deduct $500,000 right off the capital gains as a capital gains shield. If you're single, it's $250,000. Okay, so you can do it, but you got to talk to somebody and make sure you don't screw it up. Okay, so you're looking at huge tax liability with real estate. So the IRS and Congress basically said, what we're going to do is we're going to pass the IRS 1031 exchange rule, the Starker exchange rule, that basically states that if you sell your property, put the property into an accommodative account with an exchange company, you don't touch the proceeds. Proceeds go into an accommodative account with an exchange company. Within 90 days, you have to identify 3 replacement properties, and you have to close on one of the transactions in 180 days. If you violate the 180-day rule, you're going to have to pay all of the recapture, all of the transfer, and all the capital gains if you screw it up. Okay? So we talked about the taxes, we talked about capital gains, we talked about the amortization. You can also carry forward some of your losses from your property, which is also another opportunistic tax rule. Also, if you buy a certain type of building, you can get tax deduction or tax credits. So if you buy a historical landmark, you rehabilitate it, you can get tax credits or tax deductions. And the credits are awesome because you calculate your tax burden and then you subtract from the tax burden what your final tax bill is after you apply the credits. So there's the tax deduction, which is the depreciation, which lowers your taxable income to get your taxable. And if you have credits, you apply the credits and it lowers your taxable, total tax totally, okay, even more. The 1031 exchange is also called the like-kind exchange rule. We talked about the rules, 45-day rule, 180-day. We talked about the adjusted cost basis over time. If you sell your property and you get mortgage relief, or you pull some cash out of it because you buy a replacement property that's not greater or equal to the prior property you had, you're going to get some cash. That's called boot, and you're going to have to pay taxes on the boot. We already talked about depreciation. There are exchange companies, First American, Old Republic, Stewart Title. That's another great place to go work. Great opportunities to go in, learn, work with a lot of these investors in their exchanges and in the complex transactions. And then lastly, I can also sell my property in an exchange, and I can take, if I want, out of real estate because I'm 90 years old. My kids are doctors and lawyers. They have nothing to do with real estate because it's dirty. They don't want to deal with the tenants. They don't want to deal with any of the toilets or the plumbing or any of that stuff. It's like, no, Dad, Mom, I do not want to deal with the real estate. What you can do is you can exchange into a security. You can exchange into oil and gas leasehold interests. The IRS code says you can exchange into those. Those are like roach motels. In my view, they're really hard to get in and get out of. And if they go BK or go bankrupt or deplete, you may lose a lot of money in those. You can actually exchange your proceeds into a tenants in common. So there are syndicators who basically buy $20 million buildings. They will basically structure the ownership of the building as a tenants in common, which are basically security interests in the property, and I can take my property proceeds and exchange into a tenants in common security interest. I can also exchange, I don't have it on this list, but you may want to write it down. I can also exchange into a Delaware statutory trust, which is also a security. To get my clients into the TICs and get my clients into the Delaware statutory trusts, I have to have a Series 7 securities license, and I have to have a Series 66, an investment advisory license. Okay? I can't do it with a broker's license. And then the deferred sales trust. I'm doing an exchange. I got a property. I've identified the 3 properties in the first 45 days. I got 180 days to close on one of the transactions. I'm running out of time. It looks like I'm not going to be able to do it. The exchange is going to fail, and I don't want to pay all those taxes. So what I can do is I can take the proceeds, I can stick them into a deferred sales trust. Okay? I run out of my time, I get my proceeds into the trust, I didn't have to pay the tax liability, and then what I do is I basically take the recapture tax and the capital gains tax and the proceeds, and I basically pay myself in installments over a 5, 10, 15, 20-year time period. And as I receive the cash from the trust over the installment period, that's when I pay my capital gains, and that's when I pay my recapture tax. So I'm able to defer, out over a time period my tax liability.
Is it at the same rate?
Hmm?
Is it at the same rate?
You will write in the exchange contract with the exchange company a installment sales contract, a deferred sales contract as an addendum to the contract. That will basically state an X date within the exchange period. If it looks like it's going to be a failed exchange, we will put the proceeds into the deferred sales trust, and there will be a installment sales contract or installment contract that will basically state what your distribution is going to be by month or by year over whatever time period you want. You can customize it for whatever you want.
But the taxes that you're gonna pay, is it gonna be the same?
You're going to
tax
pay it as
rate?
you're going to pay the taxes that you would otherwise pay, but it's going to be spread out over time.
So it won't have anything to do with your income?
No, won't have an effect. That's the fail-safe. And then I listed some case studies, I listed some conclusions. There are plenty of resources here that you can look at. And then I have a bunch of data and a bunch of books available to you. I've also put the PowerPoint presentation up there too. I'll probably go through that later on and flip through it really quickly. But you have the primer and you have the PowerPoint presentation. And this is basically everything that we're going to go through in this class. And now we're going to go through it in more detail. Okay. All right, so let me do one thing before you guys go on. Statistical pretest. Okay, you're going to fill out. We'll go over it next week. Do the best you can, because as valuation experts, as research analysts, as acquisitions analysts, acquisition associates, as property managers, asset managers, portfolio managers, you have to understand statistics and distributions of returns and prices. You have to understand data analysis, because that's what valuation experts do. We use data and data analytic techniques to be able to forecast market trends and valuations. Covariance correlation. Covariance correlation is what you're going to use if you build a portfolio of assets. This is what the investors are going to want to see, is how you approach your analysis. And the more sophisticated analysts use these types of techniques. So I would just do the best you can, and then we'll fill it in. And then the exam, pull out your exam. We'll talk about model building, because you may at some point in time be hired as an analyst, or maybe by yourself, to be able to forecast employment, absorption, vacancy rates, rents, net operating income, value of the properties. Maybe you'll use some of these techniques to model out and use the modeling to pick the properties that you want to buy in that location at that time period. So there's a science behind it. We'll talk about monetary policy, because we just came through the financial crisis. The Federal Reserve basically drove interest rates to zero in Japan, and in Europe, they drove interest rates negative to try to prop up asset values. So from a macro standpoint, if you want to know where real estate values are going to go in the future, you basically look to Fed policy, because it's really the Federal Reserve, at the end of the day, that regulates the economy and regulates real estate prices. We'll talk about yield curves, like we did last time, which is really the base of valuations. The yield curve has an influence on stock prices and real estate prices. Okay? And then how do you determine, how do you come up with a discount rate? I'll walk you through that too. Then I'll walk you through, which is also in the Introduction to Commercial Real Estate PowerPoint presentation, I'll walk you through the real estate cycle phases and give you that information on how to analyze what markets are in what cycle phase and where are we in the phase. And do you want to be buying real estate when the valuations are declining and rents are falling and occupancy rates are falling? Do you want to be buying properties in the decline phase? No. You want to be buying them at the bottom and start to see that the market's shaked out and you're starting to see job growth come back. That's when you buy. And the opportunistic people actually buy right before the bottom because nobody's in the market. Nobody's buying at that time. And then I'll walk you through why you would include real estate in your stock bond portfolio. Real estate is an inflation hedge. Real estate's cash flows are basically pegged to the inflation rate. In those leases that you sign, that your tenants sign, there's a CPI adjustment embedded in the rent contract. So as inflation goes up, the rents go up in lockstep with the inflation. And because real estate is a commodity, on the back end, the value of the real estate also goes up with inflation because you're constantly plowing money into the property, using materials and material costs at the current inflation rate. So no other asset class basically has an inflation hedge like real estate. And actually, when you add real estate to your stock bond portfolio, it diversifies the portfolio. So I'll walk you through the portfolio strategy as an investor and why you would put real estate in your portfolio. Then we'll talk about derivative trades. I was heavily involved in the construction of real estate value indexes. Indexes that tracked the real estate market. And with those indexes, you as an investor could buy a put option if you thought the values were going to go down. You could buy a call option if you thought the prices were going to go up. If you thought that the value of your portfolio was going to go down, the institutional investors could buy a put option or could write a forward contract or a futures contract to hedge off the risk so that when the values went down, they were making money on the derivative contracts, so it hedged off the value and protected the portfolio from a decline in the asset values. Then I will walk you through the supply-demand analysis, the microeconomics around real estate valuation. We will walk through the intrinsic valuation theories. I'll walk you through those. And then we will do a case study, a mini case study on that. And then I will walk you through the investment decision-making matrix, which you just asked me about, which was what is the relationship between the present value and the price, present value minus the net present value and the internal rate of return. So they're all related, so I'll walk you through that whole matrix. And then that will be the quiz. And then as you move forward through the class, you have a solid theoretical foundation to then build on and do the case studies and do the problems. So the first third of the class is all theory. So the last 2/3 of the class is total application. We will be moving the class to a computer lab, so you will have access to all the presentations and you will have access to all of the Excel spreadsheets to work on in class and together. Okay? All right, so let's take a break. Maybe a 5-10 minute break. We'll come back and we'll burn through the presentations. Okay? and you've had time to work on it, fix it. Okay, so 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and I'll stop talking, and then you guys will start. I lost my place.
No, you gotta accept it.